Well, hello there. Who are you?
This is the Zodiac speaking.
Killing must feel good to God, too. He does it all the time. And are we not created in his image?
We all go a little mad sometimes.
After all, murder is, or should be, an art.
I could kill you now pretty easily. Do some interesting things before anyone showed up.
What are these films you can't wait to look at?
Welcome to the Final Girls podcast and the 22nd episode of our series dedicated to on-screen serial killers of horror film and TV history. I'm your podcast host, Anna Pogutska, #1 campaigner for Mindhunter Season 3. This was going to be an episode that covered 2 separate serial killer TV shows that emerged around the same time, but then I spent 2 hours talking about Mindhunter with one of my best friends, so now it's a standalone episode. You're welcome. Joining me is my dear friend Ruby McGuigan, who works in the programming team at the BFI and is a woman of infallible taste in clothes and serial killer media. Together, we tackle the 2 seasons of Mindhunter, created by Joe Penhall and executive produced and often directed by David Fincher. The show tracks the birth of the FBI's behavioral science unit through the fictional characters of Special Agents Holden Ford and Bill Tench, who go on the road interviewing the most notorious serial killers of American history. Along the way, the agents pioneer the development of modern serial killer profiling. Be aware, this episode contains spoilers for the entire show, which should have been 3 seasons, but is sadly only 2. And as always, given the quite dark subject matter and our senses of humor, listener discretion is advised. If you have deep thoughts about Holden Ford, Bill Tench, Wendy Carr, or anything Mindhunter related, my DMs are always open. After all, there are only so many Mindhunter memes a friendship can withstand. If you enjoy this episode, this series, or even this podcast as a whole, do leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify Podcast. You can also go to Patreon and support the show there, and you can follow me, if so you wish, over on Twitter and Instagram at AnnaBDemented, where I post rarely. And with all that said, please enjoy our take on Mindhunter. You're always interested.
Thank you very much.
That's why we're friends.
Yeah,
I'm just being sneaky.
You would
not
never have
telling
a
you.
boring friend.
I have never had a boring friend.
To be fair, there are many things that I would call your friends, but boring is not one of them.
That is almost rude.
It's almost rude, but
Yes.
not quite.
Okay, this is a rare example where we're actually recording in person for the listeners to paint a picture.
Yeah, we're in your living room. The noises of Dalston are regaling us with their usual sirens. We're surrounded by boxes of books.
That's how I live.
Yeah,
Surrounded
it's
by
very
noises and
Holden
books.
Ford-esque.
That is genuinely rude.
I know it is. Like, as I said it, I was like, there's no need to read her quite this hard, quite so early.
Within 2 minutes. How dare you, ma'am?
I know, I do apologize. You know, we love him, even though he's a true goblin.
We'll get into Holden Ford and his issues a lot more later on. But we've been friends for a very long time. At least 6 seasons of our lives.
Yes, we do count it in seasons. Yeah.
But we've never done this together. So I'm going to have to do a very strange thing and interview someone I talk with on a daily basis.
Yeah.
On mic.
We're just exchanging extended voice notes in person.
Exactly. That's a good way to think about it. If anything, podcasts are always just extended voice notes.
That's why they're so fascinating.
So, Ruby.
Hello.
Before we get into Mindhunter, there's a couple of questions that I ask everyone who comes into the show for the first time. And the first one is always, what is your own personal relationship with horror?
Yeah, I don't think we've ever had this conversation.
I don't think we have.
In 6 seasons, the character development has been lacking.
Well, I blame the writers.
Oh God, it's dad jokes already. So I think I thought about this on the way here, and I think my horror roots, because you know that I'm not necessarily a horror obsessive.
True.
It's a part of my wider cinema obsession. So it's one genre which I enjoy. But I think my horror roots are mainly sleepovers as a child, and I think probably this is quite common, of like traumatizing yourself, watching films that you're not old enough to watch with your friends at night. I think I might have told you the story before. I fell asleep with a group of my friends in the living room watching the Blair Witch Project, and then I woke up on my own in the final scene, and it's like one of my formative memories because it was whenever it came out on DVD, which must have been like I was
25
about
years ago.
Yeah, I was too small for this behavior. And yeah, it's really stuck with me as kind of a subversive taboo activity, I guess. It's naughty to watch horror films because we would lie to our parents about what we were watching and say it was a rom-com. I think I included Jaws with all of the horror films that we watched too
Jaws
young
is
as
a
well.
horror film.
Yeah, that was the other one that really freaked me out when I was really small.
I love this. I don't think you'd ever told me that story.
Have I
and that
not?
is the single most horrific film to have that experience with.
Terrible. And then have I told you the one about when I watched The Exorcist in my friend's library? Please excuse both my accent and the fact that my friend had a library. And I, after that, went to, again, I apologize, the other wing of her house. And I got locked in a toilet on my own, and I was in there for an hour.
While The Exorcist was still going?
We just finished it. So I was freshly traumatized, and then I was stuck in a toilet with only my own thoughts and the sound of the wind until my friends were like, we should probably go and find her.
Oh, did it merit a whole exhibition? A whole expedition to the other wing?
There was a rescue party.
I mean, I want to feel sorry for baby Ruby, but at the same time, you were in a house that had several wings, so I don't.
I know.
And I know that you love serial killer content.
Yeah, I think that's probably the evolution, I think, is that kind of horror is subversive sensibility evolves as you're a teenager, and you kind of cling to that as a teenage edgelord, if you will. And I think for me, that manifested as a sort of serial killer obsession, probably when I first got the internet at home. And that was my like OG 3 a.m. Wikipedia holes, were researching, how much blood did Richard Chase actually drink, that kind of thing.
We've all been there.
Yeah.
Yeah. The early days of the internet and Rot.com were a wild time.
Why were there so many crime scene photographs just readily available for children to view?
Honestly, no content warnings. No.
I haven't seen a crime scene photo on the internet in decades.
I mean, there's quite a lot of them on Wikipedia, which is actually quite a troublesome thing.
Yeah, that's not ideal.
Yeah, not great, but we digress. What do you think of when you think of a movie serial killer? Because all of the stuff that I've been focusing on, although there's obvious intersections with true crime, are fictional films and shows.
The honest answer is Hannibal Lecter.
Best
it's
answer.
A very simple, straightforward answer.
Yes.
I think he has a lot to answer for in our cultural perception of serial killers. Like, Ted Bundy is not a handsome man. You cannot lie to me and say that man is good looking. And Jeffrey Dahmer is not an interesting, charismatic individual. We've just been bamboozled by Hannibal Lecter, and we try and project him onto every other serial killer.
You're right, though.
Ashley Hopkins, come on now, what have you done?
Mads Mikkelsen only made it worse, but making him fun.
Exacerbated the issues so much.
I mean, I'm never going to complain about Hannibal Lecter, because as we know, I adore that creature.
Absolutely.
But I also agree with you, he's got a lot to answer for.
Yeah, and I think that's the kind of I think often when you and I have had conversations about serial killer movies, we always come back to this kind of question of how you dramatize them and how you do that ethically is really interesting to me. And I think that's what makes Mindhunter so fascinating, is that it really plays around with that question, and sometimes it succeeds and sometimes it doesn't, but it does it probably a lot better than most, I would argue.
Thank you for that perfect segue into Mindhunter.
Anytime.
So what is your relationship with this show? R.I.P. Mindhunter. And maybe, you know, as a larger question, David Fincher's body of work as a whole, because his films and then this TV series have really marked different eras in fictional serial killer media, from Seven to Zodiac to then Mindhunter.
Yeah, he is kind of the daddy of the genre, if you will. I am definitely one of the tragic individuals who watched Mindhunter as it was going out. So, you know, I like waited a long time for the second series, and then I waited a really long time for the third series, and I'm still...
Why did you use the adjective tragic there?
Because of the deception.
Okay, I see.
On behalf of Netflix, I was lied to, Anna, about what I was getting. You know, at least if you go in now, you're like, I understand what this is.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to get my heart broken. But no, poor naive 2017 me. No such luck. I think Fincher probably was a motivation for me watching, because I really loved Gone Girl. And I think you can see a lot of that film in the show, if only in the color palette. They look quite similar. Beyond that, I actually am not a massive Fincher fan, outside of Fight Club, which is obviously a true banger. Falls into my teenage edgelord collection. I think it's because I'm a Brad Pitt hater, and so I cannot watch Seven because of Brad Pitt, and I think that probably is one of his strongest films, but it's just not one for me.
It's quite an extraordinary film, yeah.
Yeah, so that's
starring a lot of problematic
That's
men.
my Fincher barrier, but I will say I am a huge fan of The Social Network.
Yes.
Yeah. So, you know, he's a mixed bag for me. And I enjoy that he seems like a insufferable dickhead in real life.
When the show first started in 2017, what do you remember about that moment? And what do you think kind of the show itself added to the serial killer subgenre?
My memory is that we were kind of at the height of true crime boom, I believe. I think it was not that long after the serial craze.
Yeah, that was about 2014.
And shows like The Jinx had just come out around then. And there was also kind of True Detective was on at the same time-ish. Broadchurch had just come out. Hannibal was out.
Mm-hmm.
So it definitely was kind of, at the peak moment for both true crime and sort of fictionalized mass killings, I think. And also I remember that was like when we all still believed that Netflix was really passionate about making great content. Like, so they had House of Cards. They had, I think like The Crown was brand new. I think that, what's their other big hitter? Orange is the New Black was
Orange is the New Black was massive.
Stranger Things was around that time, wasn't it?
Well, it's still around.
Yeah, but I think it was a moment when it made sense that Martin Scorsese was making his new film with Netflix, and the fact that David Fincher had a series coming out with them was like, of course, this is the new exciting thing. So it was very unmissable for people like us, I think. And from that perspective, I'm kind of surprised that it hasn't had a stronger legacy or more awards to its name, really.
Yeah, I think the first season got a single Emmy nomination for Cameron Britton for his portrayal of Edmund Kemper.
Very well deserved, but kind of shocking.
Kind of shocking. And Fincher is an interesting one in TV because he was very much at the helm of, I know it's because of the starring role of Kevin Spacey in House of Cards has kind of been erased from our cultural memory in many ways, but it was huge at the time, and it was one of those very first shows where a big name film director had made the move to television and put his creative and his creative weight behind a TV series. I mean, like, this is going to be in the vein of my movies, but I'm only going to be involved as an exec producer, maybe setting the style in the first couple of episodes. And House of Cards was massive as well in establishing Netflix as a producer of original content. And that relationship with Fincher then, you know, has continued both throughout Mindhunter and then Mank and, you know, with other kind of projects that he's done with the streamer. But I agree, when it was first out, it seemed massive. Like this, it felt like it, I think in part because it was him returning to this space
Yeah, for sure.
of the serial
His
killer
thing.
Yeah.
And there was those Rorschach, you know.
Yes.
The ink blot tests. They were everywhere. And it was like a fun marketing campaign, you know?
Yeah.
I guess it didn't have the star power that some other prestige projects had. But nonetheless, I'm kind of disappointed that it hasn't been more in the cultural lexicon. Maybe if they made another series.
Maybe. David Fincher, if you're listening. I know he said he won't make it, but I will not stop. I will not stop petitioning for it. But it's interesting you mentioned the lack of star power, because you're right. One of the things that makes this kind of interesting at the time when it launched, and I remember actually seeing, I don't know if you were there, the first 2 episodes premiered at the London Film Festival, and they screened it in NFT1 at BFI South Bank with Fincher and Jonathan Groff and
Holt McElhaney.
Hot McCallum.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
To give him his true title. That was setting the tone of the episode.
It's a Freudian slip that also happens to be true. And Fincher and Groff and McCallany were all there, I think, talking about those first two episodes. And obviously it was full because it's Fincher. But I remember being completely struck by those first 2 episodes in terms of tone and aesthetically. And I had never heard of a Jonathan Groff or a Holt McCallany ever before. And I think that, for me at least, helped connect them completely with the characters of Holden Ford and Bill Tench. So what do you think of that casting and of those 2 actors? Obviously, character actor McCallany and stage actor Groff, who has gone on to huge things and now is a Tony Award winner. Good for him. Love that for him.
I love that you know him as stage actor Groff and I know him as Jonathan from Glee.
I've never watched Glee. It's the one Ryan Murphy property I've never watched and never will.
I think that you have they kind of mirror their on-screen relationship a little bit as actors, right? You've got this sort of veteran who's been doing this for years, like grinding away, quietly respected, but not had his moment in the spotlight. And then you have the kind of Jonathan Groff, to my knowledge, hadn't done any major drama projects with a big director like this before. So he's kind of the fresh face on set. And for me, his reputation is basically like a musical theatre dweeb, with all due respect to my theatre kids out there. It really, like, that's how you see Holden initially. He's so like uptight with he's buttoned up. He's really eager. He's really nerdy. Yes. And I think that it works really well to have an actor who kind of feeds into that, and you think he's going to be super uncool. And then suddenly, gradually he evolves into this complicated, horrifying, annoying, wonderful character.
Deeply unlikable character.
I love him.
Yeah. And, you know, I think Jonathan Groff in particular has like this really interesting arc throughout, both as a performer and the character that he's playing, because he starts off almost like, you know, sort of like a puppy dog. Like, you know, he's being restrained by the FBI. He's being sent on these terrible assignments. He basically has to teach. He's frustrated with the hostage negotiation. He's frustrated with the cops he has to deal with. And then he sort of discovers this partnership with Tench and this new, very exciting, very stimulating kind of work that is both potentially going to make a huge difference. At the same time, it gets him very close to the very dark souls that he's sort of secretly fascinated with. But
not so secretly.
Not so secretly as we progress. But there's also like this thing of, it's Jonathan Groff, as you say, a theater kid, kind of trying to contain that energy within the suit, the gray suit of the FBI agent. Because Holden Ford is not like any of the other sort of detective characters of Fincher's prior work, right? The Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman characters in Seven, even the Mark Ruffalo character in Zodiac, who's the one detective, the rest are just kind of other professions. He's like this sinister square, right? Like he's trying to play straight, but he's not. And I do mean this on both levels.
See, here we differ because you think that he's not a convincing heterosexual in the show, whereas I think that he has the blind self-belief that only a straight white man in the 1970s could ever possess.
I actually do think that he plays straight incredibly well for all of those reasons, but I'm saying more that it's like this very sinister, kind of very closeted form of heterosexual masculinity that he wears like an oppressive suit.
I think that's what's so fun about the character is you're constantly trying to figure out, is he really, how messed up is this guy?
Yeah. Because
even he doesn't know. So that's part of the puzzle of the whole piece. And what works about that dynamic and what makes him quite unusual to me is that he, normally when you have this naive character who comes in as a fresh face and they're learning on the ropes and they've got all this enthusiasm, you also get, they're kind of the audience insert, right? You know, that we're learning as they learn, we're shocked as they're shocked, and they have to come to terms with the reality of what they're working on. You don't really get that with Holden. You never have that disgust at the material, which is bizarre. You kind of think that when he sits down with a serial killer, this is a young guy, he should be intimidated. He should come away from that feeling physically sick. And instead, he's sitting in his car, like vibrating out of his skin with excitement, almost like he's met his favorite rock star.
Totally that. And I wonder if it's also not to be all Holden is us, we are Holden, but that's kind of also our fascination with true crime content and serial killer movie making, is that you should be disgusted, but you're not. You're fascinated.
Absolutely, yeah. You kind of, that's one of the clever ways that the show plays around with the ethics of that. I think you have Bill there to sort of bring you back to earth and say, no, this man is manipulating you. I mean, where is Bill Tench in my life? I need this. No, you're not friends. Like, calm down.
I think I'm the Bill Tench in your life.
He didn't text you back? No, it's because he's a serial killer.
I've said this so many times, actually.
So he's kind of there to, but to me, what that kind of feels like when you're watching is it's reassuring you, don't worry, you're not a bad person for enjoying this, because the show is here to remind you of the kind of the correct morals, but it's also indulging you in your sort of fangirling or fanboying over these figures in a way. So it's complex.
Don't you say. And what about Bill? You know, he's so much more the traditional idea of not just kind of a 1970s man, 1970s American man, but also our idea of a kind of very square, very morally sound FBI agent. How does he and Holden play? How do they play off of each other?
Yeah, it kind of almost plays like sort of old school buddy comedy, doesn't it? With like the, as you say, the eager puppy and the kind of grizzled veteran who's sort of sighing and smoking constantly and like drinking black coffee, and he just wants to go and play golf. And Holden's there kind of tugging on his sleeve like, but no, Dad, we have to go and see Charles Manson.
But it's Charles Manson,
it's Charles Manson. But what I love about the way Bill's character develops is you do have that at the beginning. He almost puts like a physical and emotional distance between himself and the subjects. He is the one who's there to kind of remind you, no, they're not your friends. Stay away. And he actually has a personal life, which nobody else in this show really does. So, you know, he's got this beautiful family who we get to know a little bit, not hugely, but
we get to know them more in season 2. His wife Nancy and adopted son Brian.
Absolutely. But it's really impactful when even he is not able to keep those barriers up. And there's a really effective scene where he kind of has a breakdown towards the end of the first series, after he finds out that his son has discovered some of the crime materials, the evidence in his house, which he should never have brought home anyway. Never bring the work home. So that ends that period of Bill being the upright, I always do the right thing, I never mess up character, and kind of pushes us into a new phase of him being a lot more vulnerable.
What I find really fascinating, and kind of want to hear you talk about it, is how they react to these murderers that they meet. Once the sort of, you know, when it sort of kicks off in the 3rd episode of the first series, right? That they get the funding and the approvals, and they set off on this mission to interview convicted serial killers. And then it becomes sort of like a parade of who's who of serial murderers in American history. And obviously the setting this in the 1970s is very crucial, not only because it kind of is loosely based on the real life FBI agents who set up the behavioral science unit that has now become kind of canonized through psychological and serial killer horror movies, from Silence of the Lambs to pretty much everything else. It's also the peak moment in American history where there were so many serial killers on the loose and also alive and in jail, convicted. What do you think about the way that how they both approach these interviews, the meeting of these men who have committed all of these terrible, terrible crimes?
Yeah, the Monster of the Week interviews.
Yeah.
Well, I guess initially they approach it with very little strategy, absolutely zero structure. They are going in really just kind of indulging their own interests and in a way their own egos. They're kind of demonstrating that the first meeting with Kemper, Holden lies to get in there. He just flashes his badge and makes himself feel like a big shot because he got to wed Kemper. And there's kind of a quite strong element of that in the first few conversations, or I can't remember how many it is now, until Wendy arrives as the woman in the situation who has to tell the boys to behave and make them do actual science, please, and not just get paid to go and meet people they think would be fun to talk about at the pub.
Yes.
And write some kind of plan for those meetings. So I think that her role, there's a really great scene after they meet Jerry Brudos, who's the foot fetishist, and she's listening back to the conversation that they've had, which is, you know, a good example of them having very little structure, really just being quite sensationalist, wanting to hear the most depraved thing that they can in a way, and also kind of leaning a little bit too much in the sex. And like basically she calls them out for leaning into that fetish essentially and kind of indulging their own male ego and being annoyed by things that threaten that. The fact that he's interested in women's shoes is clearly a problem for them because they don't understand it. So her role is to basically bring them back down to earth and kind of slap them on the wrist a little bit. Thankfully that role evolves during the show because otherwise she'd become quite boring. But initially it's nice to have her as that kind of break.
Like grounding force. And I definitely want to talk more about Wendy later. But one thing, rewatching the show, and you know, I've watched it multiple times. It is similar to Zodiac, a comfort watch. Maybe, and I think not so much because of the salacious nature of it, but because of the structure of it and the clinical structure of the interviews. And it's essentially a workplace dark comedy, if you will. Because what's really interesting about Mindhunter and the interviews with the serial killers for me is that all of these films and shows, including, you know, a show that came out around the same time as this, the True Detective, the first series, they're all follow the same structure, which is find the killer, solve the mystery, solve the puzzle, right? Here, there's no puzzle to be solved. These criminals have already been caught. They're already in prison. They're already convicted. Their culpability is not up for debate. That changes with season 2, which we'll discuss. But the whole premise of the show is it's a parade of the most grotesque serial killers that have ever terrorized American cities. And those interviews become very strange scenes because they all are different. The attempts at systematizing them at the start kind of fail. You know, Wendy tries to institute these very scientific methods, and even then she herself, when she starts doing interviews, kind of throws them out the window. And they're all kind of even shot slightly differently because all the killers look different. They all talk differently. They all come from these different experiences. And what's really interesting is that they all kind of frame themselves as the real victims.
Oh, for sure. Primarily, it's their mother's fault.
It's always a woman's fault.
In fact, I think always it's their mother's fault. Yeah, they're fascinating because they do admit their crimes, but they do not admit responsibility for their crimes ever.
Yes.
Which is infuriating. You kind of think they would, because they seem to be very self-aware about how they will be perceived. And some of them are very keen on self-mythologizing. I think that the show is quite good at making the most infamous murderers that are featured the best at that, which makes sense. You know, Manson is good at it. Berkowitz is good at it. Ed Kemper is good at it. They're basically playing a game to kind of present their own legacy when they're in these interviews. But what they never do is apologize or try in any way that is genuine to get people on their side, because they don't know how to do that, really.
No, and they fundamentally don't care either. I mean, I want to talk more in depth about Kemper in a little bit, but I did find those scenes so interesting because it's essentially an anatomy or a taxonomy of serial killers, the most famous ones, right? And they all are different, like I said, but they have this self-victimizing and self-mythologizing at the heart of them. And there's this really good piece by Haley Campbell in JQ that I read before you came around to record. And there's a line that I want to read, which I think kind of nails it. Every murderer is an unwanted, rejected, ignored, virginal loner who blames women for what he has become. They see themselves as the victims of women rather than the other way around. And I think kind of that's the brilliant underlining thread of the whole series, without either Holden or Bill specifically looking at it that way. Like, they're not actually asking them about why do you hate women, but I think that's kind of what they end up unpicking in most of those interviews.
It does actually take external forces to point that out to them, though, of course, because they have their male blinkers on. And, you know, one of the show's flaws, and it does have them, is that it doesn't really give women much of a voice. In some ways, that's a good thing, because I think that these... it's never a good thing to not give women a voice, but, you know, often these films and shows can dwell too much on the victims, kind of. And I am quite glad that we don't have that as much. But I would love for Debbie, who does point out, no, they actually just hate women. I can't remember her exact line, but she does have one where she point blank tells Holden, no, this man isn't complicated. He's just a misogynist. She's not a particularly well-written character. She has her moments of being quite fun to watch, but she's not got any development, and she just disappears halfway through the series. She's just gone and never mentioned again.
She dumps Holden for very good reasons.
Yeah, he's not a good boyfriend.
And then is never heard of again.
Never once. And so between her and Wendy, they do kind of nudge them in the direction of, have you noticed they keep mentioning how it's their mother's fault and also they hate women? But yeah, it is a flaw in the show that they don't give that voice, for sure.
It's absolutely, you're absolutely right. And between Wendy and Nancy, who's Bill's wife, who is pretty much absent. She's only seen very briefly in the first season, and then has a much bigger role, but again, a very frustrating role in the second series, where she keeps asking very openly and very clearly for her husband's support as their son is essentially accused of being involved in a terrible murder and might be a little psychopath in the making.
We'll get to my thoughts on that.
Yeah. She's also continuously ignored. Continuously being denied support.
Yeah, in a way that makes her appear like a nag in the show, but she's got probably the most reasonable request of all time, which is, please could you occasionally come home and spend time with your son who might be a murderer? You know?
Can we please move house once, because our son has been ostracized by every single person in our community because of he might be a little tiny psychopath.
But yeah, somehow she's made out to be unreasonable for these. Yeah,
she's the real villain. It's Nancy, isn't it? But I think one of the best characters, if not the best character in the show for me, and it has been so striking to watch her again, kind of in a very quick succession as I've re-binged the show, was obviously Dr. Wendy Carr, played by Anna Torv.
We love her.
Love Anna Torv. Love Fringe. What do you think of her character and how she changes the dynamic between the FBI lads and the dynamic of the whole show, really, as soon as she's introduced in episode 3, I believe, of the first season?
I I found the quote that I was mentioning earlier, so maybe that's a good one to bring in now.
Go for it.
She says, all you wanted to do was get him to admit he wears women's clothes. You weren't speaking his language. You were persecuting him based on something that challenges your masculinity. And it's perfect because she is completely confronting this ethical dilemma that we talk about of like, do I actually care about the psychology of killers, or am I just interested in the gory details, or do I just enjoy that it's naughty and subversive? And she's also kind of directly calling out Holden's bullshit, where he will try and behave like one of these guys in order to kind of befriend them and get them to trust him. It works sometimes, but in this case, it wasn't what he was doing, and she's completely correct. So that's her kind of disruptive influence for sure. I think going in, you sort of expect her to be the Bill ally, like more the sensible team, not the crazy Holden team. And like she is, you know, they are better friends, but I do think she's kind of an interesting complement to Holden more than she is with Bill, and that they are both quite odd characters. Like they're not that socially competent in a way. She struggles a lot in her personal relationships, not in the same way that Holden does, but it's not drastically different. You know, she also kind of can't really wrap her head around her more free-spirited partner in the second series and what she wants from her. And she has this kind of complicated ex that is a really fascinating storyline that unfolds actually kind of not in flashbacks, but in story form after it's ended. But they've both Wendy and Holden have found this kind of incredibly niche role that is perfect for them. And you can't imagine either of them really doing anything else. Like Wendy leaves behind this academic life that clearly was just limiting to her. She was tired of theorizing, tired of thinking. And she leaves it behind to actually do something and to put her kind of academic work into practice. I can't really think of another environment where she would be able to do that. There's that great scene where she does leave her slightly controlling partner in the first series because they're out talking about academic theories on something that Wendy actually has first-hand experience of, and she's like, fuck this, I'm just leaving in the middle and I'm not even telling them I'm going and I'm not coming back. And it's great, but you definitely get the sense that almost like some of the killers they interview, she'd reached the limit of like thinking about this thing and wondering what people, and she needed to go out into the world and experience it. And I kind of think that Holden is the same. He was never going to be satisfied behind a desk. He needs some kind of weird channel, and this obsession of his means it couldn't be anything other than this one job. So in a way, I see them as kind of two sides of the same coin. She's the one who's you don't think is a psychopath, but she's got a lot in common with the guy who might be.
That's such an interesting parallel. And I have to say, when I was rewatching the series, it struck me that Wendy might be the most important character for me of the whole show. And you know, it's a show, like we've discussed, about extreme violence being committed mostly against women. Not all of the victims that are discussed in the show are women, but most of them are. And those victims and women in general are very rarely shown as characters outside of being girlfriends or wives or victims. But she's also, like you said, kind of tied or bored by her academic life and the limitations of that, tied down by her first girlfriend that we see in the first season, that she sort of leaves unceremoniously, and then we reveal how she actually felt about that relationship. And there's also the closeted nature of Wendy, the fact that she's so good and then starts to become less good. That's not a great phrase, but bear with me. At compartmentalizing her life, her personal life and her working life. And it starts to sort of unfold in the second season, which I think, like, there's the relationship that she develops with Kay, which is this hot bartender that she meets in a bar, and they start dating, and their relationship sort of progresses quite nicely and effortlessly until it stops. Because Kay, who, you know, contrary to Debbie, we get to understand a bit more of Kay. She's quite a complicated character with a life before Wendy that impacts their relationship. She was married, she left her husband, she left her kid, she wasn't really for that lifestyle, she wasn't sure she wanted a child, and she
That child will probably become a serial killer and it'll be her fault. Based on the lore of the show.
Yeah, that's probably the spin-off Mindhunter Night Country. But I find it really interesting because her whole thing that becomes an issue in her relationship with Wendy is that she chose and sacrificed a lot to live openly and honestly, especially in her sexuality. But then obviously that's also hypocritical because she denies the importance that Wendy has in her life to her ex-husband when kind of confronted with the possibility that he might just take her son away from her, from being able to see him. And that's sort of a huge break. And she's also chastising Wendy all the time for being in the closet, for having to separate who she is from her work. And there's, in the second series in particular, is Wendy goes out to interview a couple of murderers who have killed men and sexually violated men as well. She uses her personal experience as a lesbian to get information out of them. And the guys she works with believe that that's a story that she concocted, that that's a lie. So even when she's being honest, she's being told that couldn't possibly be true.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. And I think this is something I would have loved to see if we ever got a third series, is digging more into this idea. There is, I can't remember who says it now. I think it's the first killer who has kind of a queer subtext.
Yes, Henley.
Does he refer...
Wayne Elmer Henley.
Does he refer to queer people as an aberration? I can't remember if it's him now, sorry, but one of them says, when you're already an aberration.
It's the second guy. It's the second guy. Let me look up his name. I always forget his name. I always think of him
Bateson?
as
Is it Bateson?
It is Bateson.
Yeah.
It's the Exorcist
The Exorcist
guy.
extra.
The Exorcist extra guy. Paul Bateson.
Yeah, so he kind of, his moral escapism, if in a way, is that he's already the worst of the worst because he's gay. So why not? I mean, he doesn't think that about himself, but he knows that society thinks that. And I would have really loved to see the show explore how Wendy feels about that, that perception that she would have, people that she works with would have of her as immoral when she's doing this moral work. That would have been a great storyline.
And she does pull up the guys on it because the show is set in the late 70s, and it was only 1974 when the Diagnostic Manual of Mental Disorders actually removed homosexuality as quote-unquote a mental disorder. So this would have been very recent in the timeline of the show. And the fact that Wendy has to sort of, who is a gay woman but closeted, has to defend homosexuality in this room with her co-workers without ever being able to bring up her own life and her own experience. I agree. I think would have naturally been one of the focuses of season 3 if we ever did get one. But
the compartmentalizing that you spoke about, though, is also just it's really interesting because it seems almost like freeing for Wendy initially to not have to have that element leak into her work. And we learn through her kind of hinting at what happened in her previous relationship that actually her previous partner was her boss, that they worked together, that she was quite controlling. So it's initially she gets away from that, and it's really wonderful to be able to live without the shadow of romance or sex or anything like that in her workplace. She's just Wendy and she's very clinical. But as you say, that becomes difficult in season 2 when she actually does want to have a sex life and a romantic life. And she seems to really struggle with anything sitting in a gray area. You know, that breakup with Kay happens because she can't handle the fact that Kay is complicated in that fashion and she's not allowed to be, or she doesn't allow herself to be. So yeah, she's a wonderful character and I love her. Also, she's a relatable queen because she just wants to get to the movies on time to buy popcorn and get her seats. And that does not make her uptight, Anna.
it does not.
That's just a fair way to approach life.
I understand. And also she buys tuna specifically to feed an invisible cat that she never actually sees.
Yes, which I read was... This is stupid. I read it was... Sometimes this show is so stupid. The cat just disappears at some point.
Yes.
And it's never explained. And I assumed this was just a drop plot point that was going to get picked up in season 3. But apparently it was supposed to represent another serial killer that we never meet because serial killers don't like animals and they kill animals or something. Who was going to get that?
I've read this too, and I was like, no, you're just making shit up now because you're bored of being asked
You
about
forgot about the
Mindhunter.
cat.
Yeah, I thought it was just that the cat kind of disappeared, or the cat maybe died. And then it's kind of another thing in Wendy's life because her work surrounds her with all of these really depraved individuals. She's not allowed to have nice things, basically.
She's not even a lonely cat lady anymore. She's just a lonely lady.
Oh dear. But can I tell you my theory about the show? I would
love it if you did.
So as I was rewatching them and mourning and getting angry and angry about the fact that we're never going to get season 3, I think each season, if we're thinking of a mythical season 3, is the moral degradation of each character. So season 1 is the downfall of Holden, because by the end of that series he's completely lost it. He's like an absolute maniac. His ego is through the roof. He's like things that his instincts are so infallible. He's like the Buddha of serial killers, and he can like mimic them but not become one. And he's like really pushing everyone's buttons and also pushing against the rules, like proper procedure, not just scientific procedure, but actual like legal procedure of how you can speak to killers. The scene in the final episode where he's interrogating this guy, like I believe that's like one of the first sort of real open cases that they help solve with their methods, where he's saying things where even the guy who killed a child is like, dude, are you allowed to say that? Am I here? He's like, there's these glances he exchanges with the other police officer where he's like, do you really say that? Is this on the record? Are you for real? So, and he ends up with this like with a panic attack after he went to visit Edmund Kemper because he's Edmund Kemper's next of kin. If you end up being Edmund Kemper's next of kin, you have severely failed at being a human being. That is not a good place to be in your life or in life in general. So Holden is morally like dying by the end of the season. By the end of season 1, season 2, I think, is the moral downfall of Bill Tench, because we get a lot more space for his personal life and the way that both his marriage and his family life, which he clearly holds very dear and is very much kind of, for better or worse, a very square kind of all-American cowboy man who takes his little briefcase, goes back home, has like this little suburban life, is like genuinely like protective of his family and very protective of any of the murderers that he talks to, asking him about his family. Gets very aggressively defensive of them.
His hobbies are golf and barbecues.
And
exactly.
That's pretty much it.
Nothing scandalous for Bill Tench.
No. He wears his little, undershirt. He smokes in bed. He has a little whiskey. Nothing too extreme. He has his buzz cut. It's always perfectly straight. It's like freshly mowed lawn on his head.
I want to see single Bill in season 3 and see exactly how his physical appearance falls apart.
Maybe he grows his hair out.
Maybe he gets a beard.
Listen, don't say that to me. And then by the end of season 2, which ends up being this end of season everything, he arrives at this empty suburban home. There's nothing there except his 5 shirts, his wife, his son gone. He's failed his wife. He's failed his son. He's essentially failed as a family man, which is the thing that kind of grounded him.
And he may have had the wrong man convicted for murder.
That too. And
not a good moment for Bill.
No. And I think that season 2 was planting the seeds for season 3 to be Wendy's moral degradation, of the kind of the impossibility of her being closeted while Greg, who's a nitwit anyway, is like so clearly a homophobe. Greg hater. I fucking hate Greg. He's a Nepo baby. He's an FBI Nepo baby. And he's a homophobe, very clearly.
I'm a Greg hater mainly because I love Jim so much, and Greg's presence denies me Jim.
Exactly. Plus, he's a homophobe.
That's who I'm not a fan of that, no.
Yeah, no, that's genuinely not good. And he like, I think the tension that might have existed in season 3, that might have exploded in some way, would have been between Wendy both trying to do the work that she wants to do and sort of being denied even by the FBI. There, after she goes out to the field and does a couple of interviews, she's essentially, her wings are clipped by the FBI director. And then there's all of her personal life also imploding. It's not particularly that dramatic in season 2, but I think maybe we would have seen Wendy really struggle.
They're definitely
with both her
chipping
lives.
away at the things that give her a sense of self. And yeah, you're right. I think that could have definitely escalated. It's hard to imagine her losing her temper. Kind of enjoying imagining it, actually.
I would like to see it. I had a little moment of fantasizing there.
I wonder if we want to mention the real woman who inspired her at all.
Dr. Anne Burgess.
Dr. Anne Burgess, because I think, I mean, whilst she is obviously a fascinating woman in her own right, who people should go away and have their own Wikipedia holes about, I do think the way that the show chose to adapt her, I'd be interested to get your take on.
Go for it.
Because the original woman, Dr. Anne Burgess, who was the only woman consulting at the FBI in the 70s and was instrumental in this work, she was a nurse, but a nurse with a PhD, so she was like a doctor. And she came from a background of working with rape victims, and her motivation for working with the behavioral science unit was to fill in the other side of the victim's experience. I even have a quote from her here. The biggest motivation from my perspective was helping victims, which is like not what we get from Wendy at all. With all the love in the world to Wendy, she's not that interested in the victims or the crimes. What she's interested in is unpicking the psychology of the killers. So I think it's interesting that they removed that they changed her profession. What do you think of that?
Well, I just started watching today, at the time that we're recording this, the 3 or 4 part docuseries called Mastermind, which is now on Disney Plus, which is all about the life and the work of Dr. Anne Burgess. And she's still alive. She's fascinating. And she does talk about this. She talks about how unseriously her work was taken at the start, how rape was not even considered a crime. So they didn't even think that, rape victims could be categorized as victims. And essentially, like you were saying, she was doing that work as a non-FBI agent to give them the structure. She essentially devised all that structure that then became the backbone of profiling. But she was not... She was also doing, before she was allowed to listen to the interviews with the serial killers, she was doing the interviews with the victims. So she was trying to get essentially a picture of the killers, of the perpetrators, through the victims' accounts.
Just an extra hoop to jump through for women.
She said this really interesting thing in the series, which is obviously not a Mindhunter, but of how she was always interested, even as a nurse, in how people felt. And how she was constantly told by her bosses during her entire career that didn't matter, to stick to the facts. And she found that she was gleaning so much information that was valuable through listening to people's stories, listening to how they recount their experience, these very traumatic, violent experiences. And that was the basis of her first book, the one that kind of drew the FBI to her. Which was about rape, where she interviewed 70 plus victims of rape and kind of essentially created a case study for that as a violent crime. I wonder that as well, having not known anything that much about her before watching this docuseries. I wonder if there's an element of taking away that quote unquote feminine coded empathy from Wendy.
Mm-hmm.
In order to approximate her more to the coldness of the FBI lads. Mm-hmm. In order for her to be more of a force to be reckoned with, someone who is unflappable by them, by the organization of the FBI, by the killers themselves. She's never impressed. She will cut them down to size, not in a necessarily bullish way, but in a way that is like, this is not child's play. This needs to serve a purpose, and it needs to be unimpeachable. And the only way for it to be unimpeachable is for it to follow a scientific methodology.
Yeah.
And I wonder if it's because it made her a more interesting character, especially when she's written as a closeted lesbian, where you're essentially putting these two very contradictory is not the right word, but thematically contradictory realities that she's living in. She's living in two worlds.
Yeah.
Essentially. And whether the way that she's choosing to live is damaging to her in the long term, we'll never know, because we're not getting more series. But I wonder if that was why, because otherwise maybe it would have made her the star of the show, or maybe, you know, they also...
She is the star of the show.
Yeah. But they also like choose, they make the specific choice with all the characters to create fictional names.
Yeah, for
fictional
sure.
stories. They've done this with John Douglas as well, who's the sort of the FBI profiler whose book Mindhunter is essentially quote unquote adapting very loosely, and who inspired Holden Ford very loosely.
One thing that I thought was funny, because I have also watched some of the Mastermind series. Yeah, one thing that her son said was that both Douglas and Ressler had very immediately cemented their reputation because they were all about that book deal. They were all about being on television and that talk show, where she was just getting on with the work, which is slightly why she's been a little bit lost to history. And, you know, Douglas is fictionalized, but he did also, you know, we'll talk about the Atlanta murders in more detail, but he did in real life fuck up that case by giving an interview to People magazine where he spoke about the suspect and why they had profiled him, which is a very Holden Ford move.
That is so Holden Ford.
I don't know how much he has been changed, in all honesty.
I didn't know.
People magazine, Anna.
I wanna talk a lot about the Atlanta murders because I think they're...
Me too. It's my favorite bit of the show by far.
It is like substantially different from everything, from the tone of the show in season 1. But we've spoken about the characters. Let's talk about the real life serial killers that the show portrays. You used the expression earlier of like the monster of the week interviews, and that's right. Kind of how does Mindhunter deal with the monster of the week serial killers, your Richard Chases and your Son of Sams, versus more recurrent characters like Ed Kemper, or even the superstar guest stars like Charles Manson and Rex Watson?
Yeah, so there is a difference. I mean, Manson is built up from episode 1 as something you're waiting for on the show, which actually is I don't love that they do that, especially. But he's the focus of kind of one of the main establishing thematic conversations they have in a local police officer briefing that they're giving. Holden completely misreads the room and starts talking about Manson with empathy when obviously he murdered a bunch of police officers and hated them. So doesn't go down very well. Actually, did he murder any police officers or just hated police officers?
Hated them because he was leaving all those like pigs and notices.
Anyway, the police were not Manson fans. Nobody was a Manson fan. So he's set up from the very beginning as kind of integral to these big questions the show is asking, and also as the big bad in a way. The rest of them are much more transient, and I enjoy that you have this moment of, if you are well versed in serial killer lore, like many of us are, recognizing who they are, occasionally recognizing things that you may know because when you were 12 you read about it on the internet at 3 a.m. But they never indulge that instinct to go, ooh, exciting, it's Richard Speck. They always come across as, to me anyway, a little bit pathetic. Not particularly, as you say, the exception is Kemper, but not particularly interesting, quite frankly. They never give any real insight. And again, with the exception of Kemper, I don't think they're very scary. So it's kind of this bait and switch moment of you're kind of excited to meet them and see how they're going to be portrayed. And then actually it's probably just quite true to life in that they're normal human beings. And really what's interesting about those interviews for me is watching Holden and Bill interacting and watching how Holden responds to them, because he's the kind of the character that we've gotten to know, and he's the real crazy one in the room.
Yeah. It's like how many heart emojis appear out of his eyes as he's watching Manson come into the room.
Yeah, but they're kind of, that's exactly it. They're kind of character development tools. They're actually, the show never really allows them to be a character that's memorable. I can tell you bits of what happens in those conversations, but they're not distinct to me, personally.
No, you're very right. And actually, it's weird how it's the thing that perhaps we remember the most because it is a serial killer show and whatnot. You want to get there for the serial killers, but because there's not a serial killer you're chasing, none of them sort of become memorable. And I also wondered kind of about the performances, because it's all character actors, right, that are playing these serial killers. They're very accurately portrayed. They're very good imitations.
Mm-hmm.
But I did wonder, rewatching the show, if the performances can ever be anything more than that, more than imitations, more than like making them picture accurate, making them sound exactly like they sounded, which takes a lot of craft and a lot of talent, but they're not really characters. They're essentially replicating the things that were said on tape. And there are tapes. Some of those tapes are actually played in the Anne Burgess docuseries. And it's shocking how accurate they are to what we see in Mindhunter.
The Berkovitz, Son of Sam actor, that's him.
Literally.
I don't understand. Did they bring him back? I don't confusing.
Shocking. The only exception for me is Cameron Britton with Ed Kemper. And I think mainly because he's obviously, that relationship between him and Holden is fictionalized and is used, as you said, as a character development tool for Holden. He's the only one who actually becomes a character, and Britton is allowed to sort of stretch his quote-unquote imitation into something else, into this relationship that is a power play. And it's never sexual, but it is, because Kemper killed only women, but it's very threatening. And it's very enmeshed with Holden. And Holden sort of welcomes it to a point. He keeps going back to him. He puts his little cards on the wall as kind of proud mementos. This kid is not okay.
No. I mean, someone intervene. It's interesting you say it's never sexual. I'll have to disagree.
Go for it.
I think it's actually explicit in the show that it kind of is. That final well, it's not the final confrontation, but the final confrontation of season 1. I mean, I'm skipping ahead a little bit on this conversation, but the relationship culminates in, as we mentioned earlier, Holden going to visit Kemper in hospital after an attention-grabbing, quote-unquote, suicide attempt, where he basically lands himself in hospital because he's put Holden as his next of kin, so he thinks he'll potentially show up. Which in itself is like, come on now.
Like, he's not that into you.
He's not that into you, but I guess he doesn't have anything else to do. Like, he's in prison.
I mean, that is fair.
That confrontation, they've built Kemper up to be genuinely intimidating in a way that, to me, none of the other killers presented in the show are, because he is the villain in many ways. He's huge. He's got this very controlled manner about him that you just get the sense of contained strength, which is very scary.
Yeah.
And in this scene, he, for the first time, stands over Holden, very close to him, and you can kind of see the difference in them physically. But he explicitly says, I killed all those girls so that they would be with me forever. I could kill you now and do anything I want to you before anyone comes, and then you would be with me forever. So he 100% does cast Holden as a threat, but it's there as a kind of underlying, maybe I mean it, someone he desires to own in the same way that he did the women he killed. But also, you can never trust anything Kemper says, because as Bill is always reminding us, that, that married man is not going to leave his wife. That guy in a band who is not going to give up coke and reform himself for you. And that serial killer that you've befriended, he will rape and decapitate you. And he is lying. He is manipulating you. So maybe he doesn't mean it. I don't know. It's impossible to understand.
You've convinced me. I love this. No, you're absolutely right. And I did get chills when you were, from memory,
scary, right?
recounting that scene. And that is probably the scariest scene of the entire show for me. It's not a horror show outside of its dealings with horrible people and horrible crimes. But that scene was genuinely terrifying, particularly in how they used Kemper's physicality.
Yeah.
And he does this in other scenes with Holden, but there's one scene very early on when he's doing his interviews and he sort of touches his neck and he traces his finger alongside Holden's neck to demonstrate how he decapitated someone.
Yes.
Terrifying. And he does this little teasing.
He's really
elements.
good at it. We haven't really spoken about the violence of the show because even though there is none on screen, it is a very violent show. And a lot of that comes from Kemper. The way that he describes his crimes, and the others do this too, is so explicit and so graphic that it is actually, to me, much more violent than if I had watched a character be stabbed on screen.
Absolutely.
But the kind of language they use is so coarse and confronting. And one way that he very effectively sort of manipulates and intimidates them is he just kind of describes this stuff very matter-of-factly as if it means nothing to him. He even complains, butchering people is actually really hard work. Yes, people underestimate how much physical strength it takes to rip a person limb from limb.
To quote Leslie Vernon, you have no idea how much cardio I have to do to kill this many people.
It's only a matter of time for a quote.
No, you're right. The violence it's not visual, it's verbal. We don't actually see any murders committed. We see crime scene photos.
Always quite, I would argue, tastefully.
Yes.
You sort of see them.
You do. I think the show does take a lot of care in not displaying particularly female bodies and particularly not any children. And there are, as there are in season 2, most of anything, because it deals with the Atlanta child murders, there's a lot of children being killed. And the show does abstain itself from showing us the graphic violence of that. But we do get, particularly in season 1, where we do have a little bit of a Rolodex of serial murderers, we get so many descriptions of how those murders were done. And what we do see sometimes is even people's, not the Tench and Ford's reaction to it, because they're a bit more seasoned with this sort of crime, but the local police officers who often bring these cases to them are traumatized even trying to articulate what had happened in a crime scene.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and sometimes we don't even have to hear it, actually, because the acting is very good in this show. And whilst you may hate him, one of the really memorable scenes for me is Greg's kind of, I'm going to say hazing.
Yes. That's
where
fair.
he has to listen to what again, a little Easter egg for people who know they're serial killers, we know to be the Toolbox Murderer tapes as part of his induction into the team, which are these really harrowing, incredibly graphic and very upsetting actual recordings of women being tortured and killed, and the murderers themselves outlining their intentions. And that scene is incredibly powerful because you're just you don't hear anything, but you just watch Greg react, and it's really scary. Again, it's a quiet moment, but it's unnerving.
Before we move on to talking about the Atlanta murders, do you feel like we've given Ed Kemper the attention that he would have wanted?
I don't know if anyone's capable of that, Anna. I mean, I'm not his mother. And some wrongs can never be unwronged. I guess the only other thing to kind of explore with him is what he means to Holden, because we've sort of talked about him as a person, but we haven't talked about why Holden ends up at that hospital bed in the final scene. And as you say, he's reached a point of kind of moral decline that is unparalleled. Very impressive, but
never to be repeated. But yeah, what do you think he means to Holden?
I think for me, he is the first character who sort of pays attention to him and enjoys him and wants to talk to him. And I notice as they meet all these other killers, most of them actually, they're quite indifferent, most of them, except for the big names who know that they're onto a press hook, basically. But most of them don't really care. If they do care, they're more interested in Bill. Brutus even leaves Bill a voice note because he's not there one day, and he leaves a little thing on the recording saying, Bill, I miss you. Come back, Bill. And I feel like Kemper is the only one who Holden feels he has any kind of personal connection to, and that's very validating for the puppy that arrives at the beginning. So I think he ends up back with Kemper at the end, because when he's been told by his boss, stop doing everything you're doing, you're a disaster, and he's been put through a formal investigation for using the phrase 8 ripe cunts in a formal, I don't know if I can say cunts on the podcast. I just did.
You're the Holden Ford of this conversation.
I know. Oh my God. And he's pissed off all of his colleagues, and he's been dumped by his girlfriend. The only person who's going to give that ego that's been so firmly fluffed for most of the series any kind of validation, I think, is Kemper, and I think that's why he ends up there. But why do you think?
Well, Well, I completely agree with everything you've just said. I want to add another note to it based on something you mentioned very early on, where you were like, Hannibal Lecter is the reason we're so fascinated with the figure of the serial killer. And there's many other reasons. I'm being kind of very reductive here, but speaking strictly about fictional ones, because Kemper is the only serial killer that gets a fictionalized storyline, and because he's the most articulate one of them, Holden very often throughout the rest of the show is constantly like, "Oh, can we just go talk to Ed? Ed is so smart. Ed is so articulate. Ed talks about his fantasies about killing people so well." And I think it's because Kemper for Holden fits this sort of idealized fantasy of a mastermind serial killer. Someone who has a very profound fantasy life, who knows how to articulate that fantasy and the why and the how of their actions and give it a larger spiritual meaning, to call back to, that final scene in season 1 where he talks about his sister, his spiritual wives, and how he owns his victims now, even after they are passing. I think this kind of extraness of Kemper fits into Holden's idea of a quote-unquote master serial killer, whereas he's so disinterested in any of the killers he interviews that don't fit those parameters.
He's really rude to them.
So in season 2, he has a couple of interviews, one of them with William Pierce, who is not very articulate and not very educated, and Holden just loses interest. He loses interest because he doesn't know the $2 words. He loses interest because he's lying about his intellectual capabilities, and he's not Ed Kemper.
I'm really glad you brought that up because I think that's a great scene that demonstrates the limitations of the team and links into the kind of some bigger ethical questions around what they're doing. Holden and Bill at numerous points demonstrate that they can't understand people who live under different circumstances to them. And in the example you've given, it's a class issue. He doesn't speak this guy's language because they have come from, he's poor and he's not well educated. It's literally as simple as that. But Atlanta, to bring us comfortably into our next conversational point, throws that whole thing into focus so beautifully because it's a fish out of water scenario, right? They are suddenly in this city in quote unquote the New South, different community, entirely different vibe. And you see quite quickly that really challenges the work that they've been doing so far, because they've been assuming every serial killer is like Ed Kemper, but they haven't considered environmental factors outside of the home life really at all. So
thank you once again for that segue.
It's okay.
Doing my job for me.
I should get a full-time co-host position.
Let's do it. See what the people say. Vote for Ruby.
Please don't comment. I have a very fragile ego. I'm the Holden Ford of...
You are the Holden Ford of this relationship. And I am pushing my wife and child away from me with every job that I undertake. Moving on to the Atlanta murders, which I think take up the whole of season 2. They're the only kind of this overarching mystery to be solved, and they're still unsolved to this day. And Wayne Williams, who is the suspect that they become attached to, the person who was jailed and continues to be jailed for 2 of the Atlanta murders, but not all of them. How does the second series and how do Bill and Holden approach that case? How does it throw, like you were mentioning before, the limitations of their abilities and their methodology into stark contrast with what they've been doing previously?
It does, yeah. So this is the first time that they've been working cases on the side throughout the show in what I consider to be an unprofessional fashion.
Oh, I'm sorry. You think that they're taking on freelance work that is not pre-approved by the manager?
I just think it's really funny how while they're on the road, every single time they arrive in a town, some confused, naive local cop will kind of bumble up to them in a bar and be like, "You guys, you'll never believe this, but some woman was brutally raped and murdered, and we just don't know what to do about it. And they're like, oh darn, it's like Scooby-Doo, but for serial killers. This is ridiculous. Everywhere they end up, they bump into a crime. Anyway, so they've been doing that kind of on the side, but this is the first time that we see them sort of taken fully out of the realm of the theoretical and actually tasked formally with like, okay, you guys think you've got the goods, prove it. Which, yeah, they're suddenly in the real world. And with the real world comes real people. The most effective of whom are the mothers of the children who've been murdered. We meet the extraordinary Camille Bell, who for me, after Cameron Britton, is the best performance of the show. She's not in it a huge amount, but she's so impactful of this as this leader of the mothers group who is seeking justice for her children. And she's a bulldog in the best way. She will not take any of their shit or any of their excuses. And she is always pushing for, I don't want to hear theory. I don't want to hear your like ideas. I want you to tell me who killed these specific children. And here are their photographs and here are their names. And you need to live with that. So it's a really, really different environment. They've also got a ton of new bureaucracy to deal with in Atlanta. They've got a majority black population in the 1970s coming just off the back of the civil rights movement. There is still a huge amount of tension that these guys have no idea how to navigate. And they regularly demonstrate that. You know, like some examples on those limitations we see, they don't think about the fact that they can't have the Atlanta Police Department investigate the Klan because the Atlanta Police Department is full of Klan members. And they keep finding out things like this that are just like, well, of course, to us, that would seem obvious, but these guys are idiots. Holden thinks he's being scientific by running experiments on whether or not kids will get into a white man's car in Baltimore. And he has to have Jim Barney, who's another wonderful character, tell him, what do you like the Baltimore projects? There's nothing to do with Atlanta family neighborhoods. There's a completely different environment. They're just also black. It's not, what are we've been doing weeks of work based on an experiment that you did like states over. This is ridiculous. So I think it's a real wake up call for them. I also enjoy that Holden has to stop wearing his suit because it's very hot, which I think is...
He also stops wearing socks, I noticed.
I'm not that into that.
Oh, I'm not into it ever, but I did notice it as a character choice.
The heat is on, literally and figuratively. We're wearing less clothes. We've got less ideas.
The heat has melted Holden's brain.
Yeah, it really has. You know, Bill is not present because he's got his own tiny serial killer to deal with. So I think it's kind of Holden's redemption arc in a way, in that he doesn't make the entire thing about him. He's not very good at dealing with it, but he's trying hard.
Well, I mean, it doesn't start off by not making it about him because he thinks that the woman who's trying to bring his attention to the Atlanta child murders is actually trying to hit on him.
Yes, this is the funniest scene of the show.
Very true. But he is, I think it's also important to point out that it's the first times that we actually interact quite substantially and meaningfully with the families of the victims. These are not just cases that we see on paper or in crime scene photos. These are real life people, the mothers group, who are holding the FBI and the police force and the mayor's office to account. And there's also all these other political issues to keep in mind, which is, like, for example, the fact that Mayor Maynard Jackson is the first Black mayor elected in Atlanta, the fact that they're building the giant Atlanta airport, that they're trying to attract all of this business to the city. They don't want a citywide murder investigation or a serial killer to be terrorizing Atlanta because it is not good for business at this particular time. And I found this image of the mayor's campaign poster, which is displayed quite prominently throughout season 2 when they're in Atlanta. By the end of the series, in the very final episode, we see the same poster completely ripped to shreds and kind of decrepit and sort of semi-rotted. And it's a very simple visual image of how the city has been sort of morally rotted by the way that they dealt with this crime spree, with these murders.
Yeah, I agree. The bureaucracy also provides us with a lot of sort of dark humor in this section of the show. Which we want to acknowledge it. It's very funny when Jim says, please never tell anyone I spent all afternoon constructing crosses for a march. It's very funny when Holden is kind of dealing with this very well-meaning but incomplete job's worth guy who tells, oh no, I can't fly for you because you need to get permission from all these different counties, and I can't print that for you because you need to go through our approved supplier list, and it takes weeks, and they end up allowing more children to die because of a silly rule about who is and isn't allowed to print a flyer. So there's this constant and increasing threat in the background, which I think you kind of lack in the first series, this sort of building tension, whilst also having a lot more human elements that are very funny like that. So I do think it's really when the show hits its stride, this entire storyline.
And what do you think of Wayne Williams, who is the suspect that they apprehend, they profile, capture, interrogate, and then ultimately gets convicted for some of the murders in Atlanta?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I was thinking, as you were talking about Holden's preference, serial killer wise, actually, if Wayne Williams was white, he'd kind of fit the bill. You know, he's smart, he's educated, he's quippy,
yeah,
he's chatty,
yeah.
He loves to self-mythologize.
He's very good with press.
Very good with press. Loves to create a scene in his favor. And I think you'd kind of expect Holden to enjoy that dance a little bit. Maybe he's grown up slightly by the time they really come face to face with Wayne Williams. But he is the first time they have almost an enemy to be competing with. You know, they'll try and find some evidence, he'll burn it. They will tap his car, he'll go on the news. You know, and he's always got a counter move to what they're doing. And I guess the culmination of that is when they interrogate him. By now they've really honed their interview technique, and interestingly, Bill is just as confrontational as Holden has been in previous interviews. He openly accuses him of being a pedophile, which I don't think that he would have done earlier in the series. But they don't succeed. They don't get what they want. They get kind of outsmarted in that interview. And actually, it's not them who eventually arrest him. It's on the basis of some other evidence. So it's kind of a fail from them.
It is a fail.
Yeah.
It's a massive fail. And I think that's what, that's one of the, I would argue, 3 endings of the show that we get. The wrap up with the Atlanta murders is that they are perceived to have had a big success, nationwide success. They get a private jet to fly back. No more coach for them. But Holden's face falls. He's crestfallen. He knows that he has failed, that he has not gotten the killer. And it's the only time in the show that there's, sort of a title card at the end that says that those murders were essentially all swept under the rug after the apprehension and imprisonment of Wayne Williams. And even the young woman who works at the hotel who first draws Holden attention to these murders confronts him privately and says, oh, your entire profile, a young black man, is everyone's profile here. That is everyone that they're chasing after, the police, all the time. So what have you actually achieved here? You've just got another black man into prison. And there is no actual justice to all the children that were killed. And this kind of single-mindedness that Holden has of this is the profile that I've designed, and because I'm a criminal genius, it is always going to be correct. There's so many, and we're not here to talk about the real life case, but there are many theories out there that are worth reading up about how maybe there was multiple killers, maybe there was multiple murderers or different criminals acting at the same time that all got swept under and not investigated and essentially abandoned because this one guy got arrested.
Yeah, I like the nuance of, and I think that is represented in the show, in that I don't think anyone finishes that series and thinks that Wayne Williams is innocent necessarily. There is plenty of evidence presented that he killed some of those children. But there is not any reassurance that he committed 30 murders or whatever. It was an insanely high number. It definitely feels as if they've found a scapegoat for all of them in one go, and that the children whose, by this point, the names we know, there's probably no other victim who we really get to know as well, even though they're not featured. They're not ever going to have a conviction for their murders. They're just going to go forgotten. And there is a great scene again with Camille, who, as you can tell, I love.
Yeah.
When Holden goes to say goodbye, and he says he's going to say goodbye, and she says, "Have you come to be congratulated?" And he denies it, but of course she's correct. He has come to be congratulated. And she points to the mayor on television and says, "That's a victory lap. You normally don't do that until you've won the race." And he leaves with his tail between his legs, which is a wonderful, not quite the dramatic cutting down he gets at the end of season 1, but he is still having his wings clipped and he's being put in his place.
And what about the other important subplot, which leads to the other big ending of the show, obviously, which is Bill's possible tiny serial killer that he's raising as well.
Oh my gosh.
I'm sorry.
I thought you were going somewhere else with that question, actually.
Really?
I thought you were going towards our recurring motif of a certain security salesman.
We'll get to him later.
Okay, fine.
Much like Mindhunter, I'm going to pepper BTK throughout this entire conversation.
For me, this is not a good storyline. It's not well thought through. The writers fucked up on this one. You know, I made a little bit of fun of the kind of them stumbling across endless cases earlier on, but the stumbling across a case in your own home, for me, stretched the limits of credibility. It was it was a little bit too silly. But as you say, the main subplot that Bill is dealing with in season 2 is his small child who he adopted, who's always been a little peculiar.
He's quiet. He might be on the spectrum.
But we don't know if Bill is being impatient with him. We kind of get the impression he is.
Mm-hmm.
Has witnessed the death of a child and, most disturbingly, claims that he was trying to resurrect him by effectively nailing him to a cross, which is not a normal thing for a 7-year-old to do. I think he's 7. I think that this was just too incredulous for me. And it took up a lot of time in season 2. I didn't really know what the point of it was, other than to really hammer home, did you realize it's difficult to do this kind of work and have a personal life? Sometimes they bleed into one another. It's like, okay. And it also, for me, sort of, I think you were probably a fan of the Manson interview more than I am, because I think you quite enjoyed that scene, whereas I found it quite irritating because he makes a lot of heavy-handed references to children and how you raise children, and it's your children. And I was like, oh, yeah, we get it. He's got a son who might be a serial killer. Haven't we all? It was just very on the nose in a way that I don't expect from Mindhunter, especially.
I'm less critical of that subplot, maybe because I wanted more of Bill Tench and his at-home tensions. I would have maybe preferred that it was less in the nose. Maybe, it was wrestling in the 70s with having like a son on the spectrum who wasn't fulfilling the ideal boy that he wanted. And maybe it was his child like having some issues at school and him not being able to be the father figure that he imagines himself to be or that he wants to be. That all would have served the same character development purpose and just been a little less on the nose. I love the ending for Bill. Like I mentioned before, him arriving at the house and it being completely empty. Him trying to call Wendy at home and that phone just ringing and ringing and ringing. It's a beautiful scene for Holt McCallany. And also, I love the scene where he's trying desperately, kind of as a last attempt to bond with his son. And he sort of switches to interviewing his son in the way that he is also interviews serial killers. And I thought that
he tries to relate
effective.
to him in the same way that they do. Yeah, my dad used to take me for ice cream.
Exactly. He's essentially applying, he sort of like tries to be a dad and then that doesn't work and then he tries to be, the Mindhunter.
Yeah. Don't Mindhunt a 7-year-old. Leave him alone. I think you're right, though. I think there is a version of this that would have been more interesting. There's one scene that I think is really strong. I think it is in season 1 because it then is followed by a Debbie scene. So as we know, she just disappears. But it's when Nancy tells him that you need to be more present. Your son misses you. I come in sometimes and he's wearing your clothes. And Bill immediately is twisting that into something that's not unusual. Children dress up in their parents' clothes. I used to put my mum's makeup on all the time. Like, this is completely normal child behavior. but you can see him processing this fear that that's depraved. That's wrong. This child shouldn't be doing that because it's what Jerry Brudos did with his mum's shoes, or it's what so-and-so did. And then you have this cut to Debbie dressing up in lingerie for Holden. And again, he's like, this is depraved. That's wrong. This is something that serial killers do. And I think a more intelligent way of them doing that family storyline would have been allowing Bill's paranoia actually to start affecting his relationship with his son rather than his son acting out.
Yeah. And kind of fulfilling all those tick boxes.
They're like one step away from having him kill a dog.
Yeah, pretty much. And if the family had had a dog or a bunny rabbit or something,
they are kicking themselves. They didn't write one in series 1.
And the third ending of the whole series is a scene of our least favorite serial killer, Mr. BTK, putting on a mask and having a bit of self-love with the souvenirs of his victims. And BTK is peppered throughout the entire series in these standalone, unconnected little glimpses at the evolution of a serial killer. What do you think of the way that the show was using and setting up BTK to essentially be the Thanos of Mindhunter?
Well, I do, in a way that's appropriate because he's every bit as like camp and ridiculous as Thanos. But I do, he gives us what I think is after the Kemper confrontation, one of the scariest scenes, which is the opening of season 2, which is a phenomenal, really genuinely creepy scene with the Roxy music over the top where his wife is coming home and walking through the house slowly and he's doing something on the other side of the door.
Hate, because it's like one of my favorite songs ever.
Yeah. That's a fantastic scene. Other than that, rubbish, hate it.
Okay, is this
0 stars?
Is this just because I know that you hate BTK?
So, no, okay. Well, actually, yes, it is. Yeah. It's the problem is, and I don't think it's just me, this is BTK's reputation. I think it's just such an odd choice because he's lame, right? He's the lame serial killer. He wasn't very good at it. The fact he evaded capture for so long is confusing to everyone and purely a result of incompetence. He was so desperate for attention in such an embarrassing, cringe fashion. He'd like write to radio shows, write to the police, try to do these Zodiac kind of Son of Sam-esque diatribes, but he's not very articulate or interesting, so they'd just be embarrassing. His little sign-off thing is like, I don't
made
even...
himself a logo.
But is the logo... I hadn't seen the logo until the show. Does he make the bee into boobs?
I think he does.
I hate that. Yeah. I hate that so much, Anna. I can't tell you. I'm not saying there's a chic way to be a serial killer, but if there is, he's not doing it. So the fact that they've kind of peppered him in, as you say, built him up to be presumably the final case that they solve, which would have, by the way, take decades because this guy didn't get caught till
the 2000s.
Like, what was the game plan here? I don't know what the game plan was. I guess they had to choose someone, or they didn't have to, but maybe they chose someone who's recognizable to, again, serial killer fans, but not necessarily the general public, like still obscure enough that he feels like a bit of an Easter egg. And, he's very easily identifiable because of his family life and where he lives and his job and the moustache. But
I wonder... And again, I'm doing the writer's room work for them, but I imagine maybe that perhaps the end game with BTK was that because of how long it took to capture him, because of how confusing and confounding the profiling of him was, because he does sort of confound every single sort of established truth that they are they're creating throughout the show. He is essentially a failure of the profiling. Of the profiling methodology. So I wonder if that's why they were like, we're trying to create this methodology to capture or at least stop in their tracks these murderers. But this one guy is going to defy the logic that we're putting in place. And because he defies the logic that we're creating, he is the biggest failure of this very system that we're seeing be born. You're
right, because he didn't have the... it's not his mother's fault. He didn't have the troubled background that some of these characters do. He's got a on the surface level fulfilling family life. He has a job that he's held down his whole life. So you're right. He is contradictory to all the things that they're discussing in those rooms. So when we're cutting between them saying all these people had mothers who abandoned them and fathers who were violent and, you know, blah, 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 blah. We're looking for someone who's never held down a job. And then you cut to BTK. It does demonstrate the failure a little bit. But, you know, do we need so much that we have to have him in every episode?
No. That does make for some creepy scenes, though. And one of the other pervasive theories about the show is that maybe Holden will have become a serial killer himself.
Oh, no, don't be silly.
So you don't subscribe?
No, I don't subscribe to that. Come on. I mean, look, being annoying and being a serial killer are not the same thing. Come on. Listen, I get it, because there are elements of Holden's personality that do come across as being a little psychopathic. Mm-hmm. You know, he has the kind of the faux charm and empathy that some of these killers do. He is quite good at being manipulative in those interviews. And there are lots of situations where you feel like maybe he's not on the same wavelength as the rest of the world. I'm thinking of the retirement party where he thinks it's appropriate to give a speech. I'm thinking of the celebration party that he's having with the local cops after they solve a case, where he starts giving a speech about the real darkness that we are about to face. And I'm thinking of like when he sits on Bill's bed, when Bill is clearly like, can you please fuck off? And he's like sitting there like, hi, Dad, do you want to play with me? And he's like, please leave me alone. So, you know, the guy is not good with social cues, which I think people often read as a hint that he might be in some way neurodivergent or lacking in the ability to relate to people, one of those. And he also does have, let's be honest, a grandiose sense of self-worth.
A huge ego that only gets bigger. Titanic, as his boss tells him at the end of season 1.
I think that my favorite quote that you texted to me while you were rewatching this was, the only mistake I ever made was doubting myself.
Inspirational quote.
Absolutely.
From Holden Ford.
But no, I don't think that. I think that, as we've said, at the end of season 1, we see him completely cut down by his work. At the end of season 2, we see him handling it a little bit better, but definitely confronting his own failures and feeling kind of conflicted, if not full on guilt. Well, actually, they're playing guilt.
Guilty. Yeah.
So no, I don't think that he's going to become a serial killer. What do you think, Hannah?
I don't think so.
No.
I think he will not
we
be
a very... Holden and Brian be serial killers.
That's true. No, only one serial killer. I mean, we could try to design what happens in season 3, 4, and 5 till the end of our days, but I don't particularly subscribe to that theory. Also, because I think it would have hindered this idea that a serial killer can be made through just through osmosis by interacting with other serial killers. That's too copycatty. It's a bit too please invite me to the party.
Although you have hit on one of the questions that the show never really solves, and which again is another reason I'm not a huge fan of the Brian subplot.
Yeah, which
is it sort of hints at the nature versus nurture query. There's a really striking and uncomfortable scene where the judge that they meet, is it a judge at a fundraiser? They're all at a funding event where they're wheeled out like show ponies.
Yes.
And this judge says, I wish I could put away every child that I met who I knew was wrong. And that hits on quite a fundamental question about what the work they're doing really means, because actually they openly admit that their goal is to prevent crimes, not seek justice for them, which, I mean, great, we don't want to punish, we do want to prevent, but they're implying that they'll be able to predict if people are going to kill people.
Yeah, they're implying they're going to become Minority Report.
Based on a profile, which is really problematic. And I feel like if we did get a season 3, that is one of the main things that I would have loved to see them explore further. But I feel like they would have done it via Brian, and their conclusion would have been, actually, yes, murderers are born. I mean, I guess it's better than blaming it on women, but I don't love it.
And, before we get to some kind of fun wrap-up bits, what do you think is the fundamental question or the fundamental query at the heart of Mindhunter? Because it's a great show. It's a flawed show, like every art. It's flawed. But there is something to it that is bigger than just, let's watch some famous serial killers in HD.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's, it's probably a variation on the nature-nurture question. And I think that what appeals to me personally about the show is that it does sort of, as we've said throughout this conversation, hold the audience accountable a little bit and make your interest in all of this mirror the character's interest, mirror even side characters. And so I think the question is partly around infamy and fame and how we interact with serial killers as a public. And I guess the kind of evolution of that is, are we the public capable of being those people? Or is there a fundamental difference in what we are? Are we a different species? Is there serial killers and the people who watch serial killers? Or is there human beings generally?
I love that. And I want to add something to that, which is what is the motivating factor for this work? Or even for us watching, right? And I think there's something really curious, which it becomes kind of the decline of the characters. We don't get to see Wendy's big season, but we do get to see shades of that. Holden in a way wants to be famous for his methods. He wants to be known as almost this clairvoyant serial killer reader, right? He wants to almost own the methodology, that his instincts are unimpeachable, always correct, which is what becomes, drives him into being reprimanded, into being antagonized by his colleagues, into breaking down at the end of season 1. I think Hench, in that same way, wants to own this moral high ground. He's like, I am good, you are bad, you are evil, and nothing that is close or dear to me can be bad or evil, which is what gets challenged with Brian. And, as clunky as it is, I think that's what it was trying to get at. It's like, nothing that comes from me can be evil. And again, there's a slight nuance because Brian is adopted. He's not their biological child, which then again, it's like, oh, have I nurtured evil, or was this child born evil and I've taken him into my home?
Yeah. Actually, you've reminded me of a beautiful scene where Nancy says that she saw him and her in the mirror and she was grateful that he wasn't hers, which is an incredibly painful, sad thing to say.
Yeah.
And it's really a shame that we don't get more Nancy not being a nag, because when she does get her moment to shine, she's wonderful.
It's incredible. And what's happening to her while Tench is away in Atlanta is quite striking and sad. And we kind of only get to see certain beats of it, in the same way that Kay and Wendy's relationship progresses, even though we don't see it. We see Nancy's terror and fractured relationship with her son and her community progress, even though Bill is away. And the other part is also the killers wanting to own their victims, similarly to the way that Kemper talks about his spirit wives and talks about Holden, about keeping them forever with him. There's this thing of almost, are we also, by watching the show, or by the creators making the show, kind of almost want to own the cultural depiction or the cultural afterlife of these killers? I think there's a really strong kind of back and forth of, do these means justify the ends? What are the ends? And also, how do these portrayals justify what we know these people have done? If we fictionalize them enough?
Yeah.
If we play them well enough? What does well enough even mean?
Yeah.
Which are quite large, unanswerable questions, but some of the things that I was looking at while rewatching the show for the 3rd or 4th time. But to end on a fun note,
yes,
I don't think people give this show enough credit for being absolutely fucking hilarious. So let's talk about some memorable funny moments.
Oh, memorable funny moments. Okay. I mean, we already mentioned Holden. I'm thinking we didn't go into it though, so let's get into it, because this is
Yes.
Holden thinking that he's going on a date and he's actually being taken to investigate a crime.
Happens to
Which
the best
the boy
of
has
us.
not learned. This happens every time he leaves the house. So I don't
Yes.
know what. But yeah, the entire sequence played for laughs of him kind of getting ready and putting on his aftershave and like his best underwear is really funny. And then like this poor receptionist who's just in her normal casual clothes and he's like, oh wow, you look great. So embarrassing. Any situation where Holden doesn't read the room well is funny. I mean, I
Yes.
mentioned a few of them before, but I do think that the just the Funders event is where he really just flounders a lot and keeps trying to give these very serious intellectual answers, and they're all looking at him like, please God, stop talking about real darkness. This is so upsetting.
My another great moment is when Holden's mouth literally hangs open when Richard Speck comes into the room, and he's like,
In fact, there are so many making fun of Holden moments, and I can't believe I haven't mentioned the stupidest one, which is we've been referring to him as Holden this whole time when we should have been calling him Model T. He's on the radio and he's like, okay, copy that eagle. And Bill just looks at him like, I'm sorry, what? What just happened? So embarrassing that he gave them code names. He is so embarrassing throughout that chase. This boy has never been in a chase before and he's very excited about it. And then his big moment of like tension is completely dissolved when Williams gets out of the car that they're chasing and brings them a sandwich.
And also another great moment is when Bill tells him, please don't moisten yourself before he even comes in when they're about to see Manson.
Please don't moisten yourself. How are they? I've actually also just with the chase, I've just remembered when they have this quite long scene with the judge arguing about getting a warrant to go and investigate Wayne Williams. Am I saying his name right? Yes. And he's like, okay, you can do it. But for all the very valid reasons that you mentioned before, Anna, I don't want any press around this. I don't want the community knowing you're investigating a black man. I don't want to be drawing attention to this whole thing anyway. I don't want them to know that I let you go in with a warrant when I shouldn't have done. And so they're like, yeah, no, we'll be quiet as a mouse. Nobody will ever know. We'll be in and out. Smash cut to 3 helicopters, 7 cars with sirens on the roof, and just Holden and Bill standing there looking like the human embodiment of that emoji that's like kind of got the like flat eyes, like squinty eyes, emoji. Very funny.
I'm just gonna straight up read quotes here.
Do it.
There was another moment where Wendy says when Holden is acting out, and she's like, "Nothing that Agent Ford does can be considered scientific."
Oh wow! Absolutely brutal. What about as a very different quote? If you're not a cop, show us your dick.
Or I think this is Bill who says this to Holden. It's like, oh, Holden and his first criminal crush. Or as this is with Debbie, when he goes, these are 2 different moments. One when he's with Debbie and I think they're in bed and he's like, I'm kinky. I'm very kinky.
Oh my God, don't. No, you've also reminded me of my actual, I love him and I do support him, but Holden's behavior with Debbie just like makes me want to die inside. And the worst bit is when he's giving her a congratulations speech because she's passed an exam or something, and halfway through she has to be like, wasn't this speech supposed to be about me? Because he's just talking about how she's helped him. And then he goes, this is my worst quote from Holden, I just want you to know that I see you.
Or when he's having dinner or drinks with Debbie and Wendy, and they sort of are making fun of him because they're both very academic, very smart, and very cutting. And he's like, it's okay. I'm not afraid of being surrounded by women smarter than me.
I wrote that one down too. And then he says he doesn't know how to make a martini. Like that's like the one thing he's willing to concede about himself. He's like, I'm basically perfect, but I don't know how to make a martini.
And also, Bill... kind of talking about Holden's crush on Kemper, when he just fully cuts through Holden's bullshit and he's like, listen, he's gonna take the fucking gun away from you, he's gonna kill you with it, and then he's gonna have sex with your face.
Yeah.
Which is a fact.
Yeah, these are facts. And then he finds that out later.
Yeah, you would do that.
It was explicitly spelled out to him, and yet this man will not hear it.
And kind of on Kemper, again, not that many funny moments with Ed.
Pizza!
Yes. But also when he, again, even Ed Kemper, convicted serial murderer, cuts down Holden Ford when he says, well, Holden, I'm not an expert. I'm not an authority. I'm just an extremely accomplished murderer who spent my entire adult life successfully avoiding capture until I gave myself up because I despaired of ever not being caught.
Yes, I wrote down that I'm just an extremely accomplished murderer. I also, my favorite shady comment from Kemper is when they go in, this is not especially funny, but they go in before, because Manson's making them wait. A classic Holden technique, by the way. Yes. They go in, they're like, oh, we'll just go and say hi to our buddy Ed. And they're kind of bragging about how well they're doing and like, oh, well, we've got all these amazing profiling techniques now. And Kemper just goes, seems like all of your knowledge from serial killers is coming from the ones that are caught. There's this wonderful awkward silence where they're like, fuck.
Mindhunter, a comedy.
It's a comedy.
Before I wrap up, I gotta ask, are you holding out hope for season 3 at any point?
I've learned from life to never expect anything. So no. Also, I think my fantasy version of season 3 is probably better than the reality, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It could happen though, you know, that's the beauty of Netflix.
And de-aging technology.
I wouldn't mind a little time jump, actually.
I wouldn't. I do want a Wendy focus season.
Yeah, same.
Like I outlined before.
Yeah.
So I think we've had enough Mindhunter for one day, but not for one lifetime.
Never enough.
What is there anything about the series that you wanted to mention that we haven't covered?
No, we covered all the major beats.
Cool. We've done our fave quotes. Thank you so much for your time rewatching the series and your insight.
My pleasure.
Especially your insight on terrible, lovable buffoon Holden Ford.
That's my guy. You know, I'm president of the fan club, so I'm allowed to make fun of him.
You've got little badges. I can see it right now.
Yeah.
Is there anywhere where listeners can find more of your work online or in person?
Absolutely not. I'm simply not online. Please don't seek me out. Please don't comment on my presence. Don't acknowledge me if you see me in public. No, I'm kidding. If you enjoy me, you can come and watch me at the BFI sometimes. Keep an eye on the program. I introduce films there and I sometimes do events there. But I'd like to avoid the internet at all costs.
It's the first time I've interviewed a digital ghost.
Don't Google me. Actually, don't. I have no idea what will come up.